The early morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the tall window of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the cold glass as she watched the first reporters gathering beyond the gates. The world had changed overnight, and she could feel the weight of a nation's grief pressing against her shoulders like a heavy cloak. William emerged from their bedroom, his face drawn with exhaustion. Neither of them had slept more than a few hours since the phone call that shattered their world. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had passed peacefully in her sleep at Balmoral Castle. The woman who had been the backbone of the monarchy for over 70 years was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. The children? Catherine asked softly, turning from the window to face her husband. The morning light revealed the tears she had been trying to hold back, glistening in her green eyes. "Still sleeping," William replied, his voice hoarse from emotion, and phone calls that had stretched through the night. "I thought we should tell them together when they wake up." Catherine nodded, her heart breaking at the thought of explaining to George, Charlotte, and Louis that their beloved Gongon would never again share tea and biscuits with them in her drawing room. The Queen had been more than a monarch to their children. She had been a loving great-grandmother who remembered their birthdays, listened to their stories, and always had time for their questions about the horses or the corgis. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, their usual cheerful chatter replaced by hushed whispers and red-rimmed eyes. Mrs. Jenkins, their longtime housekeeper, brought tea with trembling hands. She had served the royal household for 30 years and had never imagined a world without the Queen's steady presence. "Your Royal Highnesses," she whispered, setting down the tray with unusual clumsiness. "I'm so very sorry for your loss. She was everything to us all." Catherine reached out and gently touched the older woman's hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. She loved you all very much. You were her family, too." The simple gesture broke down the formal barriers that usually existed between royalty and staff. Mrs. Jenkins dabbed at her eyes with her apron and hurried away, but not before Catherine saw the gratitude in her expression. In times of grief, human connection mattered more than protocol. William's phone buzzed constantly with messages from world leaders, family members, and palace officials coordinating the massive undertaking that would be the Queen's funeral. But in these quiet moments before the day truly began, he and Catherine allowed themselves to simply be a grieving family. "Do you remember our wedding day?" Catherine asked, settling beside William on the sofa where they had spent countless evenings discussing their children's school projects and their royal duties. How nervous I was about meeting her expectations. William managed a small smile through his sorrow. "You won her over completely. She told me that night that I had chosen well, that you understood duty and service in a way that couldn't be taught. I never felt worthy of her approval," Catherine admitted. "She carried herself with such grace, such certainty. Even in her final years, she never wavered in her commitment to the country. She saw that same strength in you," William assured her, taking her hand. "The way you've embraced every royal duty, every charity commitment, every public appearance. She used to say that the monarchy would be safe in our hands because you understood that service isn't about personal glory. It's about something bigger than ourselves." The conversation was interrupted by small footsteps in the hallway. George appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, followed closely by Charlotte and Louis. The children sensed something was wrong immediately. Their parents' usual morning energy was replaced by a heavy sadness that even young children could feel. "Mama? Papa?" Charlotte's voice was small and uncertain. "Why does everyone look so sad?" William and Catherine exchanged a look that conveyed years of partnership and shared responsibility. Together, they had navigated the challenges of raising children in the spotlight, of balancing royal duty with normal family life. But this conversation would be one of the hardest they had ever faced. "Come here, darlings," Catherine said, opening her arms to welcome all three children onto the sofa. "Papa and I need to tell you something very important." The next hour was filled with tears, questions, and the kind of honest conversation about death and loss that no parent wants to have, but every parent must face eventually. William and Catherine took turns explaining that great-grandmother had died peacefully, that she was no longer in pain, and that while they would all miss her terribly, they would carry her memory and her lessons with them forever. George, as the eldest and future heir, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation beyond just personal loss. "Does this mean Papa will be king now?" he asked with a directness that only children possess. "Grandpapa Charles is king now," William explained gently. "And someday, when I'm much older, it will be my turn. And eventually it will be yours. But right now, we're just a family who has lost someone we love very much." Louis, at only 4 years old, struggled most with the concept of forever. "But when will we see gone again?" he asked repeatedly, his lower lip trembling. Catherine pulled him close, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, trying to find words that would comfort without confusing. "We'll see her in all the beautiful places she loved," she said softly. "In the gardens at Balmoral, in the horses she cared for, in the photographs where she's smiling. And every time we do something kind for others, the way she taught us, she'll be there with us." As the children processed this information, sometimes crying, sometimes asking more questions, sometimes simply needing to be held, Catherine and William demonstrated the kind of parenting that would have made the Queen proud. They were honest, but age-appropriate, comforting, but not dismissive of the children's emotions. By mid-morning, the official duties could no longer be postponed. William had to join his father for meetings about the funeral arrangements and the transition of the crown. Catherine would take the children to Sandringham, where other family members were gathering to support each other through the initial shock of loss. Before they separated, William and Catherine stood together in their private sitting room, holding each other in a moment of quiet strength. The weight of what lay ahead was enormous. The world would be watching every gesture, every expression, every word. They would need to be strong for their children, for the royal family, and for a nation that looked to them for stability in uncertain times. "We can do this," William whispered into Catherine's hair, as much to convince himself as to reassure her. "Together," she whispered back, the word carrying all the promise and commitment they had made to each other on their wedding day more than a decade earlier. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing crowds of people already gathering outside the palace gates. Some carried flowers, others held handmade signs expressing their condolences. Children drew pictures of the Queen with her beloved corgis. Elderly people shared memories of the coronation they had watched as children themselves. Catherine observed this outpouring of public grief from her window and felt the full responsibility of her role settling on her shoulders. These people weren't just mourning a monarch. They were mourning a grandmother figure who had been a constant in their lives through decades of change. She and William would need to help guide them through this loss while managing their own grief. The phone calls began in earnest as the day progressed. Prime ministers from around the Commonwealth, presidents, and royal families from across the globe, all reaching out to express condolences and to begin the complex coordination required for what would be one of the largest state funerals in modern history. Catherine found herself speaking with other royal wives and family members, offering comfort and receiving it in return. The conversations revealed the personal side of loss that the public would never see. Memories of private family dinners, of the Queen's sharp wit and occasional mischievous sense of humor, of her genuine interest in everyone's lives despite her incredible responsibilities. Princess and called personally, her voice thick with emotion, but still carrying the no-nonsense practicality that had always defined her. "She was so proud of you, Catherine," she said. "So proud of how you've handled everything, especially with the children. She used to say that you brought exactly what the family needed, warmth and normalcy and genuine caring." These words meant more to Catherine than any public recognition ever could. The Queen's approval had never been given lightly, and knowing that her efforts to honor royal traditions while staying true to her own values had been appreciated by the woman who embodied those traditions gave her strength for the challenges ahead. As evening approached, Catherine prepared for the journey to Sandringham. The children had packed their favorite comfort items, stuffed animals, beloved books, small toys that would provide familiar security in an unfamiliar situation. She had explained that they would be staying with family for several days while important arrangements were made, and that many people would be very sad and might need extra hugs and kindness. Charlotte, wise beyond her years at 7, had appointed herself the family's chief comforter. She drew pictures for everyone, picked flowers from the garden to share, and made sure Louis had his favorite blanket always within reach. Her instinctive understanding of how to care for others in times of distress was something she had learned from watching her parents, but it also seemed to come from the same deep well of compassion that had always defined the Queen's approach to service. The drive to Sandringham was quiet, with the children looking out the windows at the flags flying at half-mast and the people lining the roads. Some waved sadly, others bowed their heads in respect. The visible manifestation of a nation's grief was overwhelming, even for adults who understood the historical significance of the moment. "Look how many people loved Gone Gone," George observed, his face pressed to the window. "Yes," Catherine replied. She spent her whole life serving them, caring about them, and they loved her for it. That's what real leadership looks like, putting others before yourself. As they approached Sandringham, Catherine could see other cars already in the drive. The extended royal family was gathering, each member dealing with their own grief while preparing to support the collective mourning of a nation. There would be private tears and shared memories, but there would also be the practical discussions about roles and responsibilities in the days to come. The house itself seemed to mourn. The Queen's favorite rooms, usually bright with her presence and filled with her laughter, felt empty and waiting. Her reading glasses still sat beside her chair in the sitting room. Fresh flowers, arranged just the way she liked them, had been placed throughout the house by staff who wanted everything to be perfect for a visit that would never come. Catherine helped the children settle into the familiar bedrooms they used during family visits, but tonight the house felt different. The magic that had always surrounded visits to great-grandmother was gone, replaced by a sadness that even the youngest children could feel. At dinner, the adult family members spoke in hushed tones about funeral arrangements and constitutional procedures, while the children picked at their food and asked quiet questions about heaven and angels. Catherine and William took turns comforting not just their own children, but their young cousins who were equally confused and saddened by the loss. After the children were finally settled for the night, the adults gathered in the Queen's favorite sitting room. Without her presence, the room felt too large and too quiet, but being there together felt like the right way to honor her memory. They shared stories, some funny, some touching, all revealing different facets of a woman who had been many things to many people, but had always remained fundamentally herself. Charles spoke about her final phone call to him, just days earlier, when she had expressed her pride in how the family had come together and her confidence in their ability to carry forward her life's work. Camilla shared memories of the Queen's unexpected sense of humor and her genuine interest in people from all walks of life, and talked about her mother's incredible work ethic and her insistence that duty came before personal comfort, always. William and Catherine listened to these stories while holding hands, drawing strength from each other and from the family that surrounded them. Tomorrow would bring more official duties, more public appearances, and more pressure to be strong for others. But tonight, they could simply be family members grieving the loss of a beloved matriarch. As the evening wore on and family members gradually retired to their rooms, William and Catherine found themselves alone with Charles. The new king looked older than his years, weighted down by grief and the enormous responsibility that had suddenly become his. But he also carried himself with a dignity that spoke to the training he had received throughout his life for this moment. She was so proud of both of you, Charles told them, his voice soft with exhaustion and emotion, especially in these last years. She used to say that the future of the monarchy was secure because you understood that it's not about privilege, it's about service. And she loved how you've raised the children, with respect for tradition, but also with the knowledge that they're individuals first. These words would sustain William and Catherine through the difficult days ahead. Knowing that they had earned the Queen's respect and approval gave them the confidence they would need to help lead a mourning nation while managing their own grief and that of their children. Late that night, as Catherine finally settled into bed beside William in the guest room they had occupied during so many happy family visits, she reflected on the day that had changed everything. The woman who had been the steadying force in their lives, the final authority on difficult decisions, the source of wisdom and experience that had guided them through the challenges of royal life, was gone. But the lesson she had taught them, the example she had set, and the love she had shown them would continue to guide their path forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new responsibilities, but tonight, surrounded by family and sustained by love, they could find the strength to face whatever came next. The last thought Catherine had before sleep finally claimed her was of the Queen's hands, strong and sure, gentle when comforting a child, firm when signing important documents, always busy in service to others. Those hands had guided a nation through decades of change, and now it would be up to a new generation to carry that work forward with the same grace and dedication. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Catherine walked slowly through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of British history. 3 days had passed since the Queen's death, and the palace had transformed into the epicenter of a nation's grief. Every room buzzed with activity as staff, officials, and family members worked tirelessly to coordinate what would be remembered as one of the most significant state funerals in modern times. Catherine paused outside the Queen's private study, her hand resting on the brass doorknob that the monarch had turned thousands of times throughout her reign. Inside, everything remained exactly as the Queen had left it. Papers were still stacked neatly on the mahogany desk, reading glasses folded beside a half-finished crossword puzzle, and fresh flowers arranged in the crystal vase that had been a wedding gift from her parents decades earlier. She would have hated all this fuss, William said softly, appearing beside his wife with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had been in back-to-back meetings since dawn, coordinating with heads of state from around the world who were arriving to pay their respects. But she would have understood its necessity, Catherine replied, finally, turning the handle and stepping into the room that still carried the faint scent of the Queen's favorite perfume. She always understood that sometimes personal preferences had to give way to public duty. The study was a treasure trove of personal memories mixed with official responsibilities. Photographs of family members at various stages of their lives lined the bookshelves. William and Harry as young boys, Catherine and William's wedding day, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had brought such joy to the Queen's later years. Beside these personal mementos sat red dispatch boxes that had arrived daily for over 7 decades, each one requiring the Queen's attention and signature. Catherine picked up a small silver frame containing a recent photograph of all the great-grandchildren during last summer's visit to Balmoral. The Queen sat in the center, her face radiant with happiness as the children clustered around her chair. George was showing her something in a book about aircraft, Charlotte was braiding flowers into a chain, and Louis was attempting to teach one of the corgis to shake hands. "She was so proud of how you've handled the children through all of this," William observed, settling into one of the leather chairs where he had attended countless private audiences with his grandmother. "Yesterday, when Charlotte helped Louis write a letter to Gongon, I could practically hear her approving. The children had indeed surprised everyone with their resilience and maturity. While they were clearly grieving and sometimes needed extra comfort, they had also shown remarkable understanding of the situation. Charlotte had taken upon herself to draw pictures for the staff members who were crying, while George had asked thoughtful questions about what would happen to the Queen's horses and dogs. Even little Louis, in his 4-year-old way, had begun telling people that Gongon was watching from the clouds now. "They're processing it the way children do," Catherine said, settling into the chair across from William. "One moment, they're asking deep questions about life and death. The next, they're worried about whether the corgis know where their favorite toys are. It's actually quite beautiful in a way." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Princess Anne entered, carrying a small wooden box that Catherine recognized immediately. It contained the Queen's personal jewelry. Not the crown jewels that belonged to the nation, but the pieces that had been gifts from family members or had sentimental value that transcended their monetary worth. She left specific instructions about these, and said, her voice carrying the same practical tone that had helped her family navigate the last few days. Some were to go to museums, others to family members. But she wanted you to have this, and opened the box to reveal a simple pearl necklace that Catherine had seen the Queen wear countless times during private family gatherings. It wasn't the most elaborate piece in the collection, but it had been worn with love through decades of family celebrations, quiet dinners, and intimate moments away from the public eye. She said you would understand its significance, and continued, lifting the necklace from its velvet bed. These were a wedding gift from her father. She wore them through the war years, during the coronation celebrations, and at every important family milestone. She wanted them to continue being worn by someone who understood that true elegance comes from within. Catherine felt tears threatening as she accepted the necklace. The weight of it in her hands represented far more than jewelry. It was a symbol of acceptance, of continuity, and of the Queen's confidence in Catherine's ability to carry forward the values that had defined the monarchy for generations. "I'll wear them with honor," Catherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And someday I'll pass them on to Charlotte with the same love and trust." The morning continued with a series of meetings that required Catherine's input. As the future Queen consort, her role in the funeral proceedings would be closely watched by the public and the media. Every gesture, every expression, every choice of clothing would be analyzed and interpreted. The pressure was enormous, but Catherine had learned over the years how to balance authenticity with the expectations that came with royal duty. The florist arrived with samples of arrangements for the funeral service. Catherine and William worked together to select flowers that would honor the Queen's memory while reflecting her personal preferences. The Queen had always loved simple, natural arrangements over elaborate displays, and she had particular affection for flowers from the royal gardens that she had tended herself over the years. She would want peonies if they were in season, Catherine said, examining the proposed designs, and definitely something with rosemary for remembrance, but nothing too formal or stiff. She always said that flowers should bring joy, even at sad times. The funeral director, a dignified man who had overseen royal ceremonies for decades, nodded approvingly. Her Majesty did indeed express preferences for natural beauty over formality. "We'll incorporate flowers from all the royal gardens: Buckingham Palace, Windsor, Sandringham, and Balmoral. Each arrangement will tell part of her story." As the day progressed, Catherine found herself thinking about the public reaction to the Queen's death. The news reports showed unprecedented crowds gathering outside royal residences, people waiting in line for hours just to sign books of condolence, and tributes pouring in from every corner of the globe. The Queen had touched millions of lives, most of whom had never met her personally, but had found comfort and stability in her steady presence throughout their own lives. "The queue to see her lying in state will be enormous," William said as they reviewed the logistics for the public viewing period. "They're predicting people will wait 8 to 10 hours, possibly longer. Some have been camping out since yesterday evening just to secure a place." She would be both amazed and humbled by that response, Catherine reflected. She never fully understood how much she meant to ordinary people. She saw her role as simply doing her duty day after day, year after year. But that consistency, that reliability, It gave people something to hold on to during uncertain times. The planning sessions revealed the incredible complexity of organizing a state funeral for someone who had been a monarch for over 70 years. Heads of state from around the world were arriving, each requiring specific protocol considerations. Security arrangements had to accommodate not just the funeral service itself, but the millions of people who would line the streets of London to pay their respects. Catherine's role in all of this was both highly visible and deeply personal. She would need to support William through his own grief while helping their children understand and participate appropriately in the ceremonies. She would need to be strong for the public, showing the kind of composure and dignity that people expected from the royal family, while managing her own emotions about losing someone who had become a beloved grandmother figure. The afternoon brought a private family gathering in the Queen's sitting room, where personal memories were shared away from the cameras and official duties. Charles spoke about his mother's final weeks, how she had remained engaged with current events, and concerned about the welfare of her family right up to the end. Camilla shared stories about the Queen's unexpected wit and her genuine interest in people from all walks of life. She asked about each of you individually during our last conversation. Charles told the assembled family members. She wanted to know about George's interest in aviation, Charlotte's love of dancing, Louis's progress with reading. Even in her final days, family came first. These personal details brought both comfort and fresh tears. The Queen had been the matriarch of their family in the truest sense, someone who remembered birthdays and school achievements, who worried about their happiness and their health, who celebrated their successes and offered wisdom during difficult times. Catherine found herself thinking about the conversations she had shared with the Queen over the years. Early in her relationship with William, these interactions had been formal and somewhat intimidating. But gradually, as Catherine proved her commitment to both William and to royal duty, the Queen had opened up, sharing insights about the challenges and rewards of life in the public eye. The secret, the Queen had once told her during a quiet moment at Sandringham, is never to lose sight of who you are underneath all the ceremony and protocol. The crown may change you, but you must never let it replace you. The people need to see something real and genuine, something they can connect with. Everything else is just costume and performance. That advice had guided Catherine through every public appearance, every speech, every interaction with the media. She had learned to balance the formality required by her position with the warmth and accessibility that made her genuinely popular with the public. The Queen had noticed and appreciated this balance, often commenting privately on Catherine's natural ability to make people feel comfortable and valued. Evening brought the arrival of more international delegations, each bringing their own protocols and security requirements. Catherine and William attended several private receptions, offering personal thanks to world leaders who had traveled great distances to honor the Queen's memory. These interactions revealed the global respect that the Queen had earned through decades of diplomatic service and personal relationships built over years of state visits and international correspondence. The President of France spoke eloquently about the Queen's role in maintaining strong ties between their countries, even during periods of political tension. The Emperor of Japan recalled her gracious hospitality during his first state visit to Britain as a young man. Commonwealth leaders shared stories of her personal interest in their nation's development and her unwavering support for the values of democracy and human rights. She never forgot that her role was about service, not power, one elderly prime minister observed. In an age of political turmoil and changing alliances, she represented something constant and trustworthy. That's why people everywhere are grieving, not just those she ruled. Catherine listened to these tributes while standing beside William, their hands occasionally touching for comfort and support. The magnitude of what they were inheriting was becoming clearer with each conversation. The Queen hadn't just been a ceremonial figurehead. She had been a working diplomat, a symbol of stability, and a living connection to decades of history that would soon exist only in memory and record. As the evening wound down, Catherine and William returned to their private apartments where the children were waiting with their nanny. The contrast between the formal receptions and the simple bedtime routines of family life was jarring, but welcome. George wanted to hear more stories about Gongon's childhood. Charlotte needed extra reassurance that everyone would be safe during the busy days ahead, and Louis simply wanted his parents to stay close while he fell asleep. "Will there be a lot of people at the funeral?" Charlotte asked as Catherine tucked her into bed. "Yes, darling, quite a lot. People from all over the world are coming to say goodbye to Gongon and to thank her for all the good things she did. Will we have to be very serious the whole time? We'll need to be respectful and quiet during the service," Catherine explained. "But it's also okay to feel sad, and it's okay to think about happy memories of Gongon. She would want us to remember the love, not just the sadness." These conversations with the children grounded Catherine in what mattered most. Beyond all the ceremony and protocol, this was ultimately about a family saying goodbye to someone they loved. The children's honest questions and natural emotions were a reminder that grief was universal, whether you were a future king or a schoolchild trying to understand loss. Later, as Catherine and William sat together reviewing the schedule for the following day, they talked about the delicate balance they would need to maintain throughout the funeral period. They would be representing the monarchy at its most solemn and significant, but they would also be parents helping their children navigate a difficult experience, and they would be individuals processing their own grief. "I keep thinking about what she would want us to focus on," William said, leaning back against the sofa cushions with exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Not the perfection of the ceremony or the impression we make on the world leaders, but something deeper than that. She would want us to remember why all of this matters," Catherine replied thoughtfully. "The service, the duty, the sacrifice, it's all in service of something bigger than ourselves. She gave her entire life to that ideal, and she would want us to carry it forward with the same dedication. And with love," William added. "Everything she did came from love, love for the country, love for the Commonwealth, love for the family. Even when duty required difficult choices, love was always the foundation." As they prepared for bed, Catherine thought about the pearl necklace that now rested in her jewelry box. Tomorrow, she would wear it for the first time, carrying the Queen's memory close to her heart while standing before the world as a representative of everything the Queen had stood for. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it was also a privilege that she would not take lightly. The last sounds of the evening were the distant voices of palace staff working through the night to ensure that every detail of the following day would honor the Queen's memory appropriately. In bedrooms throughout the palace, family members were settling down for restless sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring the final public farewell to a woman who had defined an era. Catherine fell asleep holding William's hand, drawing strength from their partnership and from the knowledge that they would face whatever came next together. The Queen had shown them, through her own example, that true leadership came not from seeking power or recognition, but from consistent, selfless service to others. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of carrying that legacy forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The morning of the state funeral dawned gray and solemn, as if the very sky understood the gravity of the day ahead. Catherine stood before her bedroom mirror at Windsor Castle, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the Queen's pearl necklace around her throat. The familiar weight of the pearls felt like a gentle embrace, a reminder of the woman whose memory they would honor today. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his full military uniform, the medals catching the pale morning light. His face bore the strain of the past week, but there was also a resolute dignity that spoke to the strength he had inherited from generations of royal service. They looked at each other in the mirror, two people who had found love within the constraints of duty and who now faced their greatest test together. "Are you ready?" William asked softly, though they both knew that no one could truly be ready for a day like this. "As ready as I can be," Catherine replied, turning to face him directly. She wore a black coat dress that was elegant, but not ornate, appropriate for mourning while still befitting her position. Her hair was pulled back simply, allowing the pearls to be clearly visible as a tribute to the Queen's memory. The children had been carefully prepared for the day ahead. George, at 9, understood the significance of the occasion and had practiced walking solemnly and standing quietly for extended periods. Charlotte and Louis would participate in the more private family moments, but would be spared the longest parts of the public ceremony. Catherine and William had decided that protecting their children's emotional well-being was more important than any protocol expectations. "Remember," Catherine said to George as they gathered in the castle's entrance hall, "today is about saying goodbye to Gone and showing respect for everything she meant to our country. If you feel sad or overwhelmed, look at Papa or me, and we'll help you." George nodded seriously, his young face reflecting an understanding that went beyond his years. "I want to make her proud," he said simply, words that brought tears to Catherine's eyes, and reminded her of William at that age, already feeling the weight of future responsibility. The journey to London was conducted in relative silence, each family member lost in their own thoughts and memories. The streets were lined with people who had waited since the early hours of the morning to pay their respects. Many held flowers, photographs of the Queen, or handmade signs expressing their gratitude for her lifetime of service. The sight of so many people united in grief and respect was both humbling and overwhelming. Catherine watched the crowds through the car window, noting the diversity of ages, backgrounds, and nationalities represented among the mourners. There were elderly people who remembered the Queen's coronation as young adults, middle-aged individuals who had grown up with her as a constant presence in their lives, and children who were experiencing their first encounter with the death of a public figure. All were united by genuine affection for a woman who had dedicated her life to serving them. Westminster Abbey loomed ahead, its ancient stones having witnessed centuries of royal celebrations and sorrows. Today, it would host what many were calling the funeral of the century, bringing together world leaders, royalty, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth. The logistics of the event were staggering, but Catherine knew that beneath all the ceremony and protocol, this was ultimately a family saying goodbye to their matriarch. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was both grand and intimate. The soaring Gothic architecture provided a sense of permanence and continuity, while the personal touches throughout the service spoke to the Queen's individual faith and values. Flowers from the royal gardens perfumed the air, and the music had been chosen to reflect both the solemnity of the occasion and the Queen's personal preferences. Catherine and William took their places with the children, surrounded by extended family members who had all played different roles in the Queen's life. Charles sat in the front row, bearing the weight of his new kingship with a dignity that would have made his mother proud. Camilla provided quiet support, her presence a reminder of how the royal family had evolved and grown during the Queen's reign while maintaining its essential character. The service itself was a masterpiece of planning and emotion. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke about the Queen's unwavering faith and her dedication to service, while personal touches throughout the ceremony reminded everyone present that they were mourning not just a monarch, but a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother who had been deeply loved. Catherine found herself thinking about the private moments she had shared with the Queen, times when the formality fell away and she glimpsed the woman beneath the crown. There had been afternoon teas where the Queen shared stories about the early days of her marriage, quiet conversations about the challenges of raising children in the public eye, and gentle advice about finding balance between personal happiness and public duty. When the congregation sang the hymn, "The Lord's My Shepherd," Catherine heard the Queen's voice in her memory, singing the same words during countless private chapel services at Windsor and Balmoral. The Queen's faith had been a constant throughout her life, providing strength during national crises and personal sorrows alike. It had been a faith that was deeply felt but never ostentatiously displayed, woven quietly through everything she did. George stood perfectly still throughout the service, occasionally glancing at his parents for reassurance, but maintaining the composure that had been carefully taught and practiced. Charlotte held Catherine's hand, her small fingers providing comfort as much as seeking it. The sight of the children handling such a difficult day with grace and maturity would have filled the Queen with pride and confidence in the future of the family she had spent her life serving. The moment came for the final prayers, and Catherine felt the full weight of the transition that was taking place. The Queen's reign was officially ending, not with the dramatic abdication of earlier monarchs, but with the peaceful conclusion of a life lived in service to others. The crown would continue, the monarchy would endure, but the unique combination of duty, dignity, and personal warmth that had defined the Queen's reign would be remembered as a golden age. As the service concluded and the procession began, Catherine walked with careful steps, aware that millions of people around the world were watching this moment. She represented continuity and stability, the promise that the values the Queen had embodied would continue to guide the royal family in the years to come. The responsibility was enormous, but it was also an honor that she accepted with humility and determination. The procession through London was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. The silence of the crowds was profound and moving, broken only by the sounds of the funeral march and the occasional sob from someone overcome by emotion. People threw flowers in the path of the cortege, and many bowed their heads or curtsied as it passed, spontaneous gestures of respect that came from the heart rather than any prescribed protocol. Catherine found herself making eye contact with individuals in the crowd, sharing brief moments of human connection across the formal barriers that usually separated the royal family from the public. An elderly woman clutched a photograph of the Queen as a young princess, tears streaming down her cheeks. A young mother lifted her toddler to see the procession, perhaps hoping to create a memory that would last a lifetime. A group of Commonwealth veterans stood at attention, their medals glinting in the pale sunlight, paying final respects to their commander-in-chief. Each of these encounters reminded Catherine that the Queen's death was not just a loss for the royal family, but for millions of individuals who had found meaning, stability, and inspiration in her example. The monarchy existed because people believed in what it represented, and the Queen had earned that belief through decades of consistent, selfless service. The journey to Windsor Castle for the private burial service provided a different kind of emotional challenge. Here, away from the cameras and the crowds, the royal family could grieve more openly as a family rather than as public figures. The chapel at Windsor had witnessed centuries of royal celebrations and sorrows, and today it welcomed one more farewell to a sovereign who had honored its traditions while adapting them for modern times. Catherine stood beside William as the Queen's coffin was lowered into the royal vault, surrounded by the tombs of previous monarchs who had shaped British history. The Queen would rest beside Prince Philip, reunited with the man who had been her constant companion for over 70 years of marriage. The personal nature of this final goodbye was both comforting and heartbreaking. The private nature of the Windsor service allowed for more personal tributes and memories. Family members shared stories that revealed different aspects of the Queen's character. Her love of horses and dogs, her skill at imitating accents, her competitive spirit during family games, and her genuine interest in the lives and concerns of others. These memories painted a picture of a woman who had managed to remain fundamentally human despite the extraordinary circumstances of her life. Catherine thought about the lessons she had learned from observing the Queen over the years. The importance of consistency in both public and private behavior. The value of listening more than speaking, especially when meeting people from different backgrounds and experiences. The art of asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. the ability to find something positive to say about almost anyone or any situation. These lessons would guide Catherine as she took on increased responsibilities in the years to come. The Queen had shown her that true leadership came not from commanding attention, but from earning respect, not from seeking power, but from accepting responsibility, not from standing apart from people, but from understanding and serving their needs. As the family gathered for a private meal following the burial, the conversation gradually shifted from grief to memories, and from memories to hopes for the future. The Queen would have approved of this transition, as she had always believed that life should be celebrated even in the midst of sorrow, and that the work of the monarchy must continue regardless of personal loss. Charles spoke about his vision for his reign, influenced by his mother's example, but adapted for the challenges of the 21st century. William and Catherine discussed their evolving roles and their commitment to causes that mattered to them while honoring the traditions that connected them to previous generations. The children played quietly nearby, processing the day's events in their own way, while remaining close to the adults who provided security and comfort. The evening brought a quiet reflection on what had been accomplished. The funeral had been flawless in its execution, moving in its emotion, and significant in its historical importance. More importantly, it had honored the Queen's memory in a way that she would have appreciated, with dignity, sincerity, and genuine love rather than mere ceremony. Catherine and William returned to their apartments at Windsor Castle, exhausted but also relieved that they had successfully navigated one of the most challenging days of their lives. The children had behaved beautifully. The public had responded with appropriate respect and genuine affection, and the international community had witnessed a display of British values and traditions that reinforced the monarchy's continuing relevance. As they prepared for bed, Catherine removed the Queen's pearls and held them for a moment before placing them carefully in their box. Tomorrow, she would continue wearing them during public appearances, but tonight they could rest, their duty for the day complete. The pearls had carried the Queen's presence throughout the funeral, and they would continue to carry her memory into the future. She would be proud of today, William said, settling beside Catherine on the edge of their bed. Proud of how the family came together, proud of how the children handled everything, proud of the response from people around the world. And proud that the work continues, Catherine added. That's what she cared about most. Not the ceremonies or the recognition, but the ongoing service to others. We honored her best by showing that her life's work will continue. The day had been about endings. The end of the Queen's remarkable life. The end of an era. The end of the longest reign in British history. But it had also been about beginnings. The start of a new reign. The continuation of royal traditions adapted for modern times. And the promise that the values the Queen had embodied would guide future generations. As Catherine finally fell asleep, she carried with her the images and emotions of the day, the dignity of the ceremony, the genuine grief of ordinary people, the strength of her family, and the sense of continuity that connected the past with the future. The Queen's farewell had indeed blended strength with sorrow, showing the world that it was possible to honor tradition while embracing change, to grieve deeply while looking hopefully toward the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve, but tonight the royal family could rest in the knowledge that they had given the Queen the farewell she deserved and had demonstrated their commitment to carrying forward her legacy with the same dedication and love that had defined her remarkable life. 3 months had passed since the funeral that changed everything. Yet Catherine still found herself reaching for her phone to call the Queen when something wonderful or concerning happened with the children. The absence felt fresh each time she realized that those conversations would never happen again. The royal family had settled into new rhythms and responsibilities, but the grief remained a constant, gentle ache that colored everything they did. Catherine stood in the nursery at Kensington Palace, watching Charlotte practice her piano lesson while Louis built elaborate block castles on the carpet nearby. George was at school, finally back to his normal routine after weeks of disrupted schedules and intense media attention. The children had shown remarkable resilience, but Catherine knew they were still processing the loss in their own ways. "Mama," Charlotte said, pausing in her practice of a gentle melody that the Queen had particularly enjoyed, "do you think Gone Gone can hear me play from heaven?" These questions still came regularly, spoken with the matter-of-fact directness that only children possessed. Catherine had learned to answer honestly while providing comfort, drawing on her own faith and the wisdom the Queen had shared during their private conversations over the years. "I believe she can," Catherine replied, settling on the piano bench beside her daughter. "And I know she would love hearing you play her favorite song. She always said that music was one of God's greatest gifts to us." Charlotte smiled and continued playing, her small fingers finding the keys with growing confidence. Louis abandoned his blocks and wandered over to listen, unconsciously swaying to the rhythm. These moments of normal family life had become even more precious since the Queen's death, reminders of what truly mattered beyond the public roles and royal duties. William appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit from a morning of meetings at Buckingham Palace. The transition period had been challenging for everyone, but especially for him as he took on additional responsibilities while Charles established his approach to kingship. Father and son were working together more closely than ever, but the learning curve was steep and the emotional burden significant. "How was your day?" Catherine asked, reading the exhaustion in her husband's eyes despite his attempt to smile normally for the children. "Productive but long," William replied, loosening his tie and settling into one of the comfortable chairs that made this room feel like home rather than a royal residence. "We're making good progress on the Commonwealth tour schedule, and the meetings with the Prime Minister went well. But sometimes I find myself wishing I could ask her opinion about some of the decisions we're facing." Catherine nodded with understanding. The Queen had been their final authority on difficult questions, the person whose experience and wisdom could cut through complicated political or family issues with clarity and grace. Learning to navigate those waters without her guidance was one of the most challenging aspects of their new reality. The afternoon brought a visit from Princess, and who had become even more of a stabilizing force within the family since the Queen's death. She arrived with her usual no-nonsense efficiency, but also with a warmth that she reserved for family moments away from public scrutiny, and had been the Queen's daughter for the longest time and carried memories and insights that helped the rest of the family understand their grief and move forward constructively. The children looked well and observed, watching Louis attempt to teach one of the palace dogs to fetch his toy airplane. Mother would be pleased to see them playing and laughing again. She never wanted her death to overshadow their childhood happiness. This was typical of Anne's direct but caring approach to difficult topics. She had helped all the family members, especially the children, understand that honoring the Queen's memory didn't require constant sadness, but rather living fully and purposefully in the way she had modeled throughout her life. Catherine and walked together through the palace gardens, discussing practical matters related to the Queen's charitable patronages and personal belongings, but also sharing memories and observations about the ongoing adjustment period, and had insights into the Queen's thinking during her final years that helped Catherine understand some of the decisions and preparations that had been made. She was particularly thoughtful about your role, and told Catherine as they paused beside a rose garden that the Queen had personally designed decades earlier. She wanted to ensure that you felt prepared and supported, but she also wanted you to feel free to bring your own approaches and ideas to the position. She didn't want you to feel constrained by trying to simply copy what she had done. This reassurance meant more to Catherine than Anne could know. The pressure to live up to the Queen's example was enormous, and Catherine sometimes worried that her own personality and interests might not align perfectly with traditional royal expectations. Knowing that the Queen had wanted her to be authentic rather than imitative was liberating and encouraging. She used to tell me that each generation had to adapt the monarchy for their own times, Catherine shared, but I think I'm finally beginning to understand what she meant. It's not about changing everything or abandoning traditions, but about finding ways to make the essential values relevant and accessible to contemporary people. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charles, who had come to discuss upcoming royal engagements and to spend time with his grandchildren. The new king was still finding his footing in the role he had prepared for his entire life, but had never actually experienced. The relationship between Charles, William, and Catherine had deepened since the Queen's death, united by shared grief, but also by shared commitment to honoring her legacy. Charles sat on the garden bench where his mother had often taken her afternoon tea, his face showing the strain of the past months, but also a growing confidence in his new responsibilities. The gardens were particularly meaningful to him, as he had worked alongside his mother for decades to maintain and improve them according to sustainable principles that reflected their shared environmental concerns. The response to Mother's death continues to amaze me, Charles said, gesturing toward the letters and flowers that still arrived daily at all the royal residences. People from around the world sharing personal stories about what she meant to them, how her example influenced their own choices, how her stability helped them through difficult periods in their own lives. Catherine had been reading many of these letters, finding them both heartbreaking and inspiring. Teachers wrote about using the Queen's example to discuss service and duty with their students. Military families shared stories about how royal visits had provided comfort during deployments and losses. Elderly people described decades of feeling connected to something larger than themselves through following the Queen's public life. It reinforces why all of this matters, Catherine reflected. Not the ceremonies or the titles, but the opportunity to provide an example of service and stability that helps other people navigate their own challenges. She understood that people needed something reliable and constant in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain. The evening brought the family together for dinner, a tradition they had maintained religiously even during the busiest periods. Tonight's meal was simple, but carefully prepared by the palace kitchen staff who had learned everyone's preferences and dietary needs. The conversation ranged from the children's school projects to upcoming royal engagements, but always with an undercurrent of missing the Queen's presence at similar family gatherings. George had been working on a school project about British history and had chosen to focus on the Queen's reign. His research had led to interesting questions about the changes Britain had experienced during his great-grandmother's 70 years on the throne, from post-war reconstruction through technological revolution to contemporary challenges with climate change and global inequality. She saw so many changes, George observed with a thoughtfulness that continued to surprise the adults around him. But she stayed the same in important ways. Is that what made her special? I think that's exactly what made her special, William replied, pride evident in his voice as he watched his son grapple with complex ideas. She adapted to change when necessary, but never compromised on the values that defined her character. Duty, service, faith, family. Those things remained constant even as everything else evolved around her. Charlotte had been working on her own tribute to the Queen, a collection of drawings showing various family memories for holidays and celebrations. Her artistic interpretation of these moments revealed a child's perspective on the Queen's role as a loving great-grandmother who always had time for stories, games, and gentle advice. She had really soft hands, Charlotte said, showing a drawing of herself holding hands with the Queen during a walk at Balmoral. And she always smelled like flowers. And she never got impatient when I had lots of questions about things. These personal details were treasures that the family would carry forever, reminders that beneath all the public roles and historical significance, the Queen had been a woman who loved her family and found joy in simple, intimate moments with the people closest to her. As the evening continued, Catherine found herself thinking about the future and how the family's grief had evolved over the past months. The sharp pain of initial loss had softened into a gentler sadness mixed with gratitude for the time they had shared and determination to honor the Queen's memory through their actions rather than just their words. The royal calendar was filling up again with engagements, tours, and ceremonial obligations. Catherine was taking on additional patronages and responsibilities, including some that had been particularly close to the Queen's heart. Each new commitment was evaluated not just for its strategic importance, but for its alignment with the values and approaches that the Queen had modeled throughout her life. "I've been thinking about the Commonwealth tour we're planning for next year," Catherine told William as they reviewed their schedules after the children had gone to bed. "I want to make sure we approach it the way she would have, not as visiting dignitaries making appearances, but as family members reconnecting with people who share our values and commitments." William nodded, understanding immediately what Catherine meant. The Queen's approach to Commonwealth visits had always emphasized listening and learning rather than lecturing, genuine interest in local cultures and concerns rather than imposing British perspectives, and building relationships that lasted beyond the official visit. "She taught us that the monarchy's strength comes from its connections with people, not from its distance from them," William observed. "Every decision we make should strengthen those connections rather than weaken them." The conversation was interrupted by Louis appearing in their doorway, clutching his favorite stuffed animal and looking uncertain about something. At 4 years old, he was still working through his understanding of death and loss, and bedtime often brought questions or worries that he needed help processing. "Is Gone still the Queen in heaven?" he asked, settling between his parents on the sofa where they had been working. "She'll always be our queen in our hearts," Catherine said, pulling him close and breathing in the sweet scent of his freshly washed hair. "But now Grandpapa Charles is the king here on Earth, and someday Papa will be king too. It's like a very important job that gets passed down through the family. And someday it will be George's turn," Louis said with the acceptance that children bring to concepts that adults find overwhelming. "That's right," William confirmed. "But not for a very long time. Right now, George's job is to be a good big brother and to do well in school and to learn about the world around him." These conversations about succession and responsibility were delicate balancing acts, helping the children understand their family's unique role while protecting them from feeling burdened by expectations that were still years or decades in the future. Late that night, after Louis had been settled back in his bed and the palace had grown quiet, Catherine and William sat together in their private sitting room, reading through some of the condolence letters that continued to arrive from around the world. Each letter told a story about how the Queen's example had influenced someone's life, often in ways that she never could have known or anticipated. A young teacher in Australia wrote about incorporating lessons on service and duty into her classroom discussions. A grandfather in Canada shared how watching the Queen's Christmas broadcasts had become a family tradition that brought 3 generations together each year. A teenage girl in New Zealand described how learning about the Queen's early years had inspired her to volunteer with elderly people in her community. She would have been amazed by these responses, Catherine said, carefully folding a particularly moving letter from a military widow who credited the Queen's example with helping her find strength during her darkest period. She never fully understood the impact she had on individual lives. "That's what made the impact so genuine," William replied. "She wasn't performing service or duty for recognition or applause. She did it because she believed it was right, and that authenticity came through in everything she did." As they prepared for bed, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. The early years of their relationship, when royal duty had seemed like a distant and somewhat intimidating prospect. The wedding that had launched them into public life, with its mixture of celebration and scrutiny. The years of learning and growing into their roles while raising young children and supporting each other through challenges and triumphs. Now, they were entering a new phase, one that carried greater responsibilities, but also greater opportunities to make a positive difference in the world. The Queen's death had been devastating, but it had also clarified their purpose and strengthened their commitment to the values she had embodied. "I miss her every day," Catherine said as she turned off the bedside lamp. "But I also feel her presence guiding us forward, not as a weight holding us back, but as a foundation supporting everything we're trying to build. She would want us to look ahead rather than behind." William agreed, his voice soft in the darkness. "To take the best of what she taught us and use it to meet the challenges and opportunities of our own time." The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, but Catherine knew that around the world, people were still processing their own grief and gratitude related to the Queen's life and death. The funeral had been a moment of shared mourning, but the true measure of the Queen's legacy would be seen in the years to come, in the choices made by those who had been influenced by her example. Tomorrow would bring new engagements, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve others in the way the Queen had modeled throughout her remarkable life. The work of the monarchy would continue, adapted for contemporary needs, but rooted in timeless values of duty, service, and genuine care for others. As Catherine drifted towards sleep, her last thoughts were the pearls she would wear again tomorrow, carrying the Queen's memory into another day of service and commitment. The farewell had ended months ago, but the legacy continued, woven into every choice, every conversation, and every moment of dedication to something greater than personal comfort or convenience. The Queen was gone, but her influence lived on in the family she had shaped, the institution she had strengthened, and the countless lives she had touched through 7 decades of unwavering service. The nation's mourning had transformed into grateful remembrance, and strength had indeed emerged from sorrow, just as the Queen would have wanted and expected.